My heart was pounding against my ribs as they wheeled me toward the operating room. But the cold sweat on my skin wasn't from the fear of surgery. It was from what the nurse had just whispered in my ear while prepping my IV line, a chilling warning that shattered my entire world in 5 words. Don't trust your husband. I thought she was completely insane because Mark was the love of my life, the man who had held my hand through every doctor's appointment and promised we would get through this medical nightmare together. But then, right before the sedation could pull me under, she slipped a manila folder beneath my blanket and told me to look inside before it was too late. I opened it with trembling fingers, expecting medical charts. But instead I found Mark's signature on a series of financial and legal documents that made my stomach drop harder than any medication could. He wasn't trying to save my life. He was preparing to end it financially and legally by signing over my entire family estate to a dummy corporation under his name the second I was incapacitated. If you want to see how a betrayal like this backfires completely, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now, because what I did next changed everything. My hands shook as I stared at his familiar handwriting, the realization hitting me like a physical blow that the man I slept next to every night was a monster waiting for me to slip into a coma. I remembered how he begged me to use this specific, isolated clinic, claiming the specialists here were the absolute best in the country. Now I knew the truth. He wanted me far away from my family, isolated in a place where nobody could question his authority. While I was under the knife, my mind flashed back to our wedding day, his tearful vows, and his promises to protect me through sickness and health. And a wave of pure, unadulterated disgust washed over me. I felt like a fool, an absolute idiot for believing his late-night comfort sessions were born out of love, rather than cold, calculated greed. The nurse, Sarah, squeezed my hand tightly, her eyes pleading with me to understand the gravity of the situation as the heavy double doors of the surgical suite loomed just ahead. I couldn't breathe, as the weight of his deception suffocated me right there on the hospital gurney, my mind racing through 5 years of a marriage that suddenly felt like a beautifully orchestrated lie. Sarah locked eyes with me, her expression a mix of terrified urgency and profound pity, signaling that we had mere minutes before the anesthesiologist walked through the double doors. I realized Mark had deliberately chosen this high-risk procedure because it gave him the perfect cover to execute his plan while I was completely helpless and unable to fight back. Every sweet text, every reassuring hug, and every tear he shed over my diagnosis was a calculated performance, designed to keep me compliant and blind to the knife he was holding behind my back. I felt a wave of nausea that had nothing to do with my illness and everything to do with the absolute disgust pooling in my chest as I looked at the power of attorney forms. He had already signed his name as the sole beneficiary, ready to liquidate my grandfather's multi-million-dollar shipping legacy the moment the anesthesia hit my bloodstream. I knew I couldn't scream, and I couldn't confront him right now because he would just spin another web of lies. So I looked at Sarah and told her through tears to stop everything. She nodded quickly, invoking a sudden medical anomaly in my vitals that forced the surgical team to halt the entire procedure and wheel me back to a private recovery room. Sitting in that dim room, the silence was deafening as I stared at the ceiling, my heart breaking into a million sharp pieces that quickly turned into pure, cold rage. I realized that my survival didn't just depend on the doctors. It depended on my ability to outsmart the man who claimed to love me more than life itself. The adrenaline was surging through my veins as I sat alone in that quiet room, realizing that Mark was still sitting in the waiting area, sipping coffee and waiting for the news that I was under. I didn't call him and I didn't cry. Instead, I used those precious hours to call my estate lawyer and my personal banker, instructing them to freeze every single asset, account, and property tied to my name. It turned out Mark had spent months setting up a massive legal trap. But by canceling the surgery and revoking his access, I pulled the rug out from under his entire existence before he even knew the game had changed. I transferred all my funds to a private offshore account he couldn't touch, revoked the medical power of attorney, and initiated an emergency divorce filing that would be served to him by morning. I watched the clock tick away, feeling a strange, cold empowerment replace the paralyzing fear that had gripped me hours earlier, realizing that his greed was going to be his ultimate downfall. When the sun finally began to rise, I packed my small bag and slipped out the back exit of the hospital, leaving Mark waiting for a wife who was already miles away and completely out of his reach. He thought he was playing chess with a pawn, but he didn't realize I was the queen, and I had just put his entire life into an inescapable checkmate. As I rode in the back of the cab, I looked at the city skyline and felt a profound sense of relief, knowing I had just saved myself from a lifetime of ruin. The pain of his betrayal was still a burning fire in my chest, but the thrill of taking back my power was a shield that kept the tears at bay. By morning, Mark finally realized he had lost absolutely everything when his phone erupted with alerts from his banks and business partners, signaling the total collapse of his carefully constructed empire. He rushed back to our house only to find the locks changed, his clothes packed in garbage bags on the lawn, and a process server waiting at the gate to hand him the divorce papers. The most shocking twist came when the police arrived at his office an hour later, tipped off by the very documents the nurse had given me, exposing his multi-million-dollar corporate fraud. It turned out Mark had secretly forged my signature on illegal business loans, using my family name as collateral. And without my surgery going through to cover the tracking trail, his lenders panicked and called the feds. But the ultimate shock came later that afternoon when my lawyer revealed Mark's accomplice was my own estranged sister, who had been secretly plotting with him to split my inheritance after my supposed medical complications. Standing in the wreckage of my past, I realized that the people closest to us are often the ones carrying the sharpest knives, but they underestimated my willingness to burn their world down to protect my own. Trust is a fragile mirror. Once broken, you can only see the distorted reflection of the person you thought you knew, and Mark was left staring at his own ruined reflection from a federal prison cell. Did Mark and my sister get what they truly deserved? Or should I have confronted them face to face to see the look of absolute defeat in their eyes? Share this story with someone who needs to remember that a woman's intuition is her greatest weapon, and that the people we love can sometimes be our most dangerous enemies. In the end, the deepest wounds don't come from the surgery we fear, but from the hearts we trusted too blindly.